a predicate. A predicate will always be a positive relationship to positive self as an identity of value. To itself.
Professional cannot work this way.
So a predicate is always a positive relationship to what will only be is the only nature of positive that is unchanging. So the nature of positive that is unchanging only has a positive relationship to itself, inherently, actively, and progressively, in relationship to the predicate as an identity of value with English. With the law, with the Predicate Act, now we're talking about the Predicate Act, which is something that, which are crimes that are like extortion, mail fraud, murders, but ones facilitated by criminal organized crime, by criminal enterprises. I am not a lawyer, I am not a criminal, and I am not a police form. This is what religions are about, this ancient course lost. Pantheism is science. This is see, we're going to learn. So with the law, a predicate act is a temporary, lasting, negative value nature relationship to itself, as to positive self. So negative value nature, still nature, still with and as the nature of positive. It is negative value nature because it's not as positive, it's also positive to itself as what our nature is together. This is why we are a species. All modern nations were taken to a fact treatment nature, organized crime breaching method that realized it could hurt nations, make them not trust international science, and they can progress the degradation of human education while advancing and continue with the international sciences. And we'll examine this as an archetypal criminal enterprise, and we'll examine how the Old Testament and how the Quran, not just the Old Testament, how the Quran as a body of physical value, and about how the Trinity together are working with multi-front counters to what sciences are multi-front areas maintained, obfuscating and forcing lies and delusions and categorically with each of the sciences, obfuscating, giving people relying upon that to hide premises, to degrade the quality of free speech, abridged. That's why it says free speech shall not be abridged. They're not just trying to speak emotional. This is a complex litigation. This is an organized crime method and nature of it. And so natures of criminal insidiousness, natures of motivations, because their target is not money with this. It is only fact treatment nature. And fact treatment natures is with finite body of value and overall, which is now forced top down, justified, only realized because of how international sciences forced writing these books too in history. In other words, before we were a nation, they had an organized crime method by fact treatment natures where everyone was a slave. There was no, in other words, there was just different part. That was with the narratives. They had laws where if no matter who you were, if you were found out to be discussing building infrastructure outside of international sciences monitored database conversations, they hurt you and your whole family. That everyone was made example of. They had all kinds of laws like that. They had people, conditions, psychology. They had international sciences, but medical corruption tied to courts and to prisons. And they had where everyone was just trained to their spot as misprision criminality, and say, oh, it's just title. But all the titles were extorted. George Washington was extorted. He wanted to explain this. We have the proofs, but we're not being let to use ratiocination. Because how? So we're going to, the predicate value and the predicate act are to show the difference between a positive relationship. In other words, the sciences share an identity and sequence just like us. They share our nature. And English was revealed to teach an identity of the sciences together.
Me, tell me join youtube.com/user/Romulus War.
So the predicate with English is always a positive relationship to positive self. Is always a positive relationship to itself as entity, and as an identity of value. All identities of value with English are in relationship to what is positive. The identity of Adam and Eve. Adam is the subject and Eve is the verb. When a verb is not used as a main verb, it becomes a participle nature or an infinitive nature. You know, you could say present participle is always formed by adding ing. They say this. But English is obfuscating itself, and with each science is obfuscating the identity they share together, and what they really, what we already know, what it really already has the potential to show us. But not that computers can't show. This is we are a correlation nature as an identity of value, as a nature. See, there's one nature. The nature of positive, the nature of Allah. This is not per the Quran. This is before the Quran, but the Quran does not deny this. The Quran is about, in relationship to a conversation about organized crime at internation sciences level. In other words, with our fact treatment natures attached to and as fact treatment nature, breaching natures, incapable of understanding the conversation and having the free speech and the ratiocination and the forgiveness, because of this was layered for her conviction natures to be too incapable of not hurting each other before describing what our common enemy is. We have all modern nations are hurt victim predators of a fact treatment nature containment method. A breaching method by a fact treatment nature, an organized crime method that has motivations not for money, but for fact treatment nature containment. That's all it needs. And it needs, but it's got everyone already invested to roles justifying it and its roles with our history, blaming our other. So they had terror laws to build infrastructure, made it criminal to anyone even thinking about discussing it. So before we even had cars, these home styles were built with the sick laws they had that carried over after colonization, because in other words, we lost our course. We lost understanding of what George Washington, what our founders were extorted by, that was already entrenched in Connecticut, in Boston, in New York, since before the birth of our founders. This is why George Washington had to meet with a French general who was to be our ally. Also, all modern nations. This nation was lost to it and taken to roles with it, even the Native Americans against themselves, because they denatured the landscape to do this. And they had criminal organized crime method for fact treatment natures, so they set up means to keep it blamed on all else. It wasn't because of the money involved with pelts and stuff like that. It wasn't because it was hard to get food here. In other words, and it was the underground. You think that New England Native Americans lived through a New England winter in tents? They had underground. They had, if you really, really own the land, that's why there's you really care for it. In other words, it's the nature that's lost was denatured to theater too, just like our founders were forced to that theater. So all this will be remembered. They knew they were making a negative value nature relationship to nature, and we being valuable only by that. And nature will cause negative value nature progressions. And they knew that we would only blame it on all else, because that's the only way we were educated to it. We lost on many fronts. We don't even have our history books the lies and delusions of the experts demonstrated. We have the hit.